I thought collecting rainwater would help me save my garden, until the HOA secretly hijacked it to water their private office garden. But they had no idea I'd find their underground pipe system, or that I'd use it to flood their entire building. Curious how? Let me tell you what really happened. They're stealing my rainwater. The thought felt absurd when it first crossed my mind, but it refused to leave. Something was off, terribly off. It all started just a few weeks ago, after I'd finally finished installing the rainwater collection system I'd been planning for months. 5 barrels, carefully positioned, connected to my roof's gutter system, each one painted to blend in with my backyard's design. I'd calculated it all. With our typical rainfall, I could save dozens of gallons during the spring showers, enough to keep my vegetable garden thriving without racking up a massive water bill. The first rain came. I stood at my kitchen window, watching with excitement as fat drops began pelting the roof. I could almost hear the soft plinks as they collected in the barrels outside. This was it, my simple, self-sustaining solution. I even did a little celebratory dance. I know it sounds silly now, but at that moment, it felt like a small triumph. But after the second storm, an even heavier one, I stepped outside to check the barrels, and they were barely a quarter full. That didn't make sense. I walked the perimeter of my property, inspecting each connection, each pipe. The gutters looked fine. There were no leaks, no cracks, and yet, my barrels were still nearly empty. 3 storms in, and the pattern continued. That's when I got suspicious. On a hunch, I grabbed a flashlight and crouched beneath the deck. My hands were already muddy by the time I spotted it, something gleaming just beneath the shadows. A pipe, not one of mine. I followed it, slowly, carefully. The pipe snaked away from my system and veered off, merging with what looked like a hidden network buried beneath decorative rocks and mulch. I was still tracing the route when I heard footsteps crunching across the grass above me. Then a voice. "Mr. Jackson!" A familiar, clipped tone rang out. I turned my head and saw her silhouette. Ms. Reynolds, the ever-dutiful president of the Pinterest Village HOA, standing with her clipboard, flanked by 2 uniformed maintenance workers. "Your garden beds extend 6 inches past your approved landscape plan." I blinked, still crouched in the mud. "Forget the garden beds," I said, standing and wiping my hands on my jeans. "Who installed this pipe? Why is it attached to my gutters?" Ms. Reynolds raised an eyebrow, barely glancing at the piping system. "The association made necessary adjustments to optimize water distribution. If you'd attended the last board meeting, you'd know we voted on it." "Voted?" I asked, my voice rising. "You're diverting my water. That's theft." She sighed, almost bored. "Mr. Jackson, let's not be dramatic. According to Bylaw 72.3, all excess precipitation resources are subject to community allocation. Your system wasn't approved by the Architectural Committee." As she turned to leave, one of the workers gave me a half-hearted shrug. I followed them down the property line, tracking the pipe as it twisted and turned toward the HOA's precious community garden, a pristinely manicured space positioned directly behind their office. I'd refused to fund that project when they proposed another increase in monthly dues. It had always felt like a vanity project for the board members, and now I was paying for it, literally. I went straight home and called the city water authority. After waiting on hold, a clerk explained that water rights, especially rainwater, are often governed by HOA agreements. "Check your contract," he advised, like it was a simple misunderstanding. That evening, my mailbox held a bright yellow violation notice, a $300 fine for unauthorized landscape modifications and confrontational behavior. I laughed bitterly, realizing it wasn't just about water. It was control. They wanted to control even what fell freely from the sky. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't sleep. My mind spun with questions. How long had they been doing this? Was I the only one? That's when I got a text from Marcus, my neighbor a few houses down. "Saw Reynolds at your place. Everything okay?" I hesitated, then typed back, "They're stealing my rainwater." His reply came instantly. Not just yours. Come over tomorrow. Bring your HOA contract. And just like that, the conflict that began with a few drops of rain had grown into something much bigger. Something I could no longer ignore. I never thought a few rain barrels would spark a neighborhood revolution. But the moment Marcus laid out the HOA documents across his dining table, I realized I wasn't alone. And this was much bigger than one stolen gutter pipe. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a highlighted section in the bylaws. His finger tapped a clause that hadn't existed the last time I'd reviewed my HOA agreement. Section 72.3. Excess precipitation collected on corner properties shall be considered community resource and redirected accordingly. That language was slipped in during last year's winter amendment. No notice, no vote, no approval, I muttered. Exactly. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight. They didn't just change the rules, they buried them. The air in the room was heavy. My violation notice sat on the table like a loaded weapon, $300 for collecting water. And now I knew why. It wasn't just my rainwater they were siphoning. It was happening to other homes too. Marcus had suspected it since his water bill had mysteriously dropped after the HOA began its beautification project. He'd tried confronting them last year about installing solar panels. They'd threatened him with architectural violations and fined him for a bird feeder. By the time we reached Eleanor's house, the third member of our quickly forming alliance, the mood had shifted from anger to resolve. At 72 years old, Eleanor was sharper than any HOA lawyer. "Come in," she said briskly, ushering us toward her dining room already covered with blueprints, colored maps, and a large mug labeled, "Retired, Not Tired." "I've been tracking their nonsense for years," she said, spreading out a neighborhood diagram. "Here's what they don't want us to see." She pointed to a network of lines sketched in red, yellow, and blue, crisscrossing properties in ways that made no sense, unless you knew what to look for. "They've constructed a hidden water redistribution system," she continued. "Started about 3 years ago. Pipes were laid under decorative rocks, irrigation systems rerouted, and downspouts repaired, but only on properties not owned by board members." My stomach sank as she traced the lines from my backyard to the community garden. "This whole thing was designed to funnel water from our homes to their project," she said. "And guess where all that moisture goes when it's not needed?" She tapped the map again. "Here, the HOA office. That building sits in a natural basin. They had to install a high-capacity pump to keep it from flooding during storms." Marcus let out a low whistle. "You're telling me that the only thing keeping their office from drowning is their illegal diversion system?" Eleanor's smile was grim. "Exactly. Without it, nature reclaims the low ground. Always does." Something sparked between us then. A realization. This wasn't just about water, it was about power, control, and a quiet little scheme run by a board that had been getting away with too much for far too long. That night, we gathered in Eleanor's kitchen again, but this time it wasn't just the three of us. Marcus had brought his daughter Zoe, a journalism student armed with a digital recorder and a righteous fire in her eyes. Eleanor invited Tom and Mrs. Jameson, both longtime residents who'd faced similar pressure from the board in the past. One by one, the stories came out. Fines for non-regulation patio chairs, threats over garden gnomes, mandatory fees for landscaping improvements that only ever seemed to appear on Reynolds' block. We weren't neighbors anymore. We were allies, and we had a common enemy. "This whole system," Eleanor said, tapping the schematics, "is built on the assumption we'll never question them. That we'll just pay the fines, attend their meetings, and stay quiet." "Not anymore," I said, and the room fell quiet for a beat. Outside, another storm was rolling in. Big one, according to the radar. Eleanor stood, crossed to the cupboard, and pulled out a waterproof folder containing laminated diagrams, hand-drawn plans, and something else. 3 small PVC valves. "Don't ask where I got these," she said, handing one to each of us. "But with a little work, we can redirect the system, put it back the way nature intended." Marcus looked skeptical. "You mean, flood the office?" Let gravity do its thing, she corrected. We're not damaging anything. We're simply removing their artificial tweaks. The water will flow where it always wanted to go. It sounded risky, maybe even dangerous, but I couldn't shake the image of Ms. Reynolds standing smugly in front of my home, clipboard in hand, accusing me of violating bylaws while stealing the very thing falling from the sky. I looked down at the valve in my hand, then up at the quiet fury burning in Eleanor's eyes. I wasn't sure what the next 72 hours would bring, but I knew one thing for certain. The war for our water had just begun. I never thought I'd be sitting in a retired engineer's living room plotting a hydraulic counterattack. But by the time Eleanor laid out the final blueprints, there was no turning back. What began as a quiet complaint about rainwater theft had evolved into something far bigger, a full-blown mission to expose, disrupt, and dismantle the illegal system that had drained not just our water, but our trust, our patience, and our dignity. This, Eleanor said, pointing to a set of laminated diagrams, is where it all starts. The main junction point. 6 properties feed into it. That's where they collect and reroute rainwater through underground pipes to feed their garden and ornamental pond. Her pen moved swiftly across the page, stopping at a small red mark. And this is the natural drainage line, where the water should be going if they hadn't tampered with it. It was elegant, really. The board had engineered a system that diverted water uphill against its natural course, all for their own benefit. But water doesn't like being told where to go, Eleanor added with a wry smile. It always finds its level. Marcus leaned in, eyes narrowing. So, we're going to let it find its level again. Exactly, she nodded. That evening, the rain tapped steadily on the windows as we prepared what Eleanor called Phase 1. While others might have viewed our actions as sabotage, we saw it differently. We weren't attacking. We were restoring balance, undoing years of quiet manipulation. The HOA had crafted a system designed to benefit the few while burdening the many, and they'd gotten away with it because no one had dared to challenge the engineering behind it. Until now. In Eleanor's garage, we assembled the pieces. Custom-fabricated redirector valves, heavy-duty tools, and a box of waterproof coveralls. Marcus, ever the cautious one, had drawn up a checklist worthy of a military operation. His teenage son volunteered as lookout. Even Zoe, his daughter, started documenting everything for her exposé. Video clips, drone footage of water flow patterns, even interviews with neighbors who'd been affected by fines, enforcement, or quiet intimidation. But the real weight of the moment didn't hit until Eleanor rolled out the master map, the one that showed the topography of the neighborhood. Right here, she said, tapping the HOA office with her finger. They built it in the lowest part of the subdivision, probably for convenience, but without the diversion system working. It floods, Marcus finished. A hush fell over the room. This is bigger than making a point, I said slowly. If we take that system down during the storm, that building's going to get hit hard. Eleanor met my gaze, steady and unflinching. And maybe that's what it takes. They've ignored warnings, hidden bylaws, stolen resources, weaponized violations. They've turned the rules against their own community. But what about blowback? I asked. They'll accuse us of vandalism. That's why you're not destroying anything, Eleanor replied. You're restoring the flow. Their system fails, not because of tampering, but because it's fundamentally unnatural. The storm just helps nature do what it was always meant to. We went silent again, the only sound the steady rhythm of rain outside. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled. Then Eleanor stood, slowly but deliberately. Tomorrow night. That's when it happens. The heaviest part of the storm will hit around 3 a.m. We'll move in teams of 2, 4 key diversion points. I'll modify the junction box. Marcus handles the eastern connection. You, she looked at me, handle the master switch. I nodded, feeling a strange mix of adrenaline and fear. We're not just redirecting water, Marcus said. We're sending a message. And we were. For too long, the HOA had treated its members like pawns on a board they alone controlled. They thought they could siphon away our rights, one drop at a time. But tomorrow, the flow would reverse. Not just of water, but of power. This wasn't revenge. It was a reckoning, and the rain would write it in every flooded corner of their pristine garden. The storm hit harder than anyone expected. At precisely 2:47 a.m., I stood in my backyard, cloaked in darkness and a storm-proof jacket, heart pounding like a war drum. Rain hammered the earth in relentless sheets, each drop a drumbeat counting down to our plan's execution. My breath came in short, sharp bursts as I sloshed through pooling water toward the first junction. Thunder cracked the sky like a warning shot. But I didn't stop. None of us did. It was now or never. Eleanor's words echoed in my head. We're not causing damage. We're removing an illegal obstruction and letting gravity handle the rest. I reached the main valve. The rain had already turned the soil to soup. Water lapped against my ankles as I crouched and unscrewed the cap, slipping Eleanor's modified redirector into place. My fingers trembled, not from cold, but from knowing this moment would change everything. The pipe hissed as the water rerouted, flowing freely into the natural downhill path, away from the HOA garden. I moved quickly to the next location, slipping once and nearly landing in a muddy trench. Marcus, working 2 blocks over, was likely on his final connection by now. He had texted Phase 1 done minutes before I left the house. I pushed through branches, soaked to the bone, eyes stinging with sweat and rain. Finally, I reached the master valve, the control point for the entire illegal diversion system. I hesitated. Behind me, my house glowed faintly in the storm, a beacon of defiance powered by collected rainwater the HOA had once tried to control. Ahead, invisible in the night, was the pristine garden they stole it for. Eleanor's voice rang again in my memory. We're not just redirecting water, we're redirecting accountability. With a deep breath, I turned the valve. There was a moment of stillness. The storm didn't pause, but something shifted. I swear I could feel it, the land exhaling, the system groaning as it realigned with nature. And then, the water surged. You couldn't see it, but you could hear it, gurgling underground, a current freed from its chains. By the time I slipped back into my garage, soaked and shaking, the deed was done. Dawn was just beginning to lighten the sky when Marcus texted one word. Flowing. A moment later, Eleanor followed with a photo. A stream of runoff cutting a straight line downhill toward the HOA office. I made coffee and watched from my window as the true spectacle began. Water poured down the road, collecting in the natural dip where the HOA building sat. Their prized community garden, once smugly maintained with stolen water, now looked like a swamp, its decorative borders floating like toy boats. By 8:17 a.m., Ms. Reynolds' SUV splashed down the street and screeched to a halt outside the building. She stepped out and immediately sank ankle-deep into muddy runoff. The look on her face when she opened the door and water poured out onto her designer shoes was one I'd replay in my mind for years. She screamed into her phone, then ran inside only to stumble back out moments later, drenched and furious. Neighbors began to gather at the ends of their driveways. Whispers spread like wildfire. Did you see the flood? Was that the HOA building? How did that happen? By noon, the news van Eleanor had tipped off rolled in. The Channel 5 reporter filmed as Reynolds flailed about trying to salvage documents from the soggy wreckage. Her voice rose in fury, declaring it sabotage, vandalism, a targeted attack on the community. But the reporter just smiled politely, filming every dripping accusation. Then came the emergency HOA meeting notice, hastily posted on community mailboxes. 3:00 p.m., community center, attendance required. We showed up in force. More neighbors than ever before filled the room. Ms. Reynolds stood at the front, soaked and seething. She held up a baggie containing Eleanor's altered valve like it was a murder weapon. This, she said dramatically, was found inside our flood-damaged system. This is deliberate destruction of HOA property. Before she could continue, Eleanor rose slowly, clutching a stack of documents. Or, she said coolly, it's evidence of your illegal water diversion project collapsing under the weight of its own corruption. She spread the original neighborhood drainage maps across the front table. What happened last night wasn't sabotage. It was gravity reclaiming its rights. You can't keep water uphill forever. The room fell into stunned silence, and just like that, the tide had turned. Not just for our rainwater, but for the truth. The community center buzzed with low murmurs and anxious whispers. Folding chairs scraped the floor as residents filled every seat, many attending their first HOA meeting in years. The room was packed wall to wall. Homeowners, reporters, even a few off-duty city workers curious about the now infamous flood at the HOA office. All eyes turned to the front as Ms. Reynolds, still damp from the morning chaos, adjusted the microphone with visibly trembling hands. Her polished image had cracked, hair frizzed, heels muddy, and pride wounded. "This emergency session," she began, her voice tight, "is to address the blatant sabotage of HOA property. What happened this morning was not an accident. It was a coordinated attack." She held up a plastic evidence bag containing one of Eleanor's modified valves. Gasps spread across the room. "This illegal component was found inside our irrigation system. Our board believes it was deliberately installed to cause catastrophic failure during a storm." A murmur of concern rippled through the audience. But before Reynolds could drive her accusations further, a calm, clear voice rose from the crowd. "Then perhaps," Eleanor said, standing slowly, "you'd like to explain how that component ended up in a system that was never approved in the first place?" Ms. Reynolds flinched. Eleanor stepped forward with slow, deliberate confidence, a folder of documents clutched tightly in her hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, for the past 2 years, this board has implemented unapproved water diversion systems throughout our neighborhood. They have redirected rainwater from private properties to maintain their personal landscaping projects, including the now destroyed HOA garden and pond." Gasps erupted again, louder this time. "You have no proof," Reynolds snapped. Eleanor's smile was razor sharp. "Actually, I do." She unfurled blueprints across the front table, original drainage plans overlaid with a transparent sheet showing the board's unauthorized changes. Colored lines snaked through the diagrams, highlighting connections between 6 private homes and the HOA garden system. These modifications were made without permits, inspections, or homeowner consent. They not only violated county water regulations but endangered the structural safety of several homes. And when that system failed last night, when nature reclaimed its course, it revealed everything. The crowd stirred. People leaned forward, craning to see the evidence. From the back of the room, Marcus stepped up next, holding a thick binder. "I'd also like to share our findings," he said, his voice steady. "These are financial records showing that nearly $2,700 of HOA funds were funneled into the unauthorized irrigation project, all under the category of community beautification. Strangely enough, the landscaping company hired to build it is owned by Ms. Reynolds' brother-in-law." A stunned silence followed. Then, a flurry of whispers and gasps. Reynolds' face turned a shade paler as she reached for the mic again, but she was interrupted, this time by a stern new voice. "Excuse me," said a woman from the back, striding confidently to the front. "I'm Diana Fuller, Assistant District Attorney for the county. My office has received multiple complaints and extensive documentation about the HOA board's conduct. I'm here to inform you that an official investigation is now underway." Reynolds' composure crumbled. "You can't just walk in here and—" "I can," Fuller replied sharply. "As of this afternoon, your board accounts have been frozen. Cease and desist orders are being issued to halt all current HOA projects involving water diversion, pending the investigation's outcome." The audience erupted. Some cheered, others shouted questions. Ms. Reynolds stood frozen, her hand still gripping the mic stand like a lifeline. Her voice, when she finally found it, was shrill. "You don't understand what's at stake. This community needs leadership. Without us, everything falls apart." "Then it's time for new leadership," said a quiet voice from the side. All eyes turned to Mr. Kapoor, a retired judge from the end of the street. He stepped forward, placing a hand on the mic. "I propose the formation of an interim committee, volunteers from the neighborhood. We'll hold formal elections once the investigation concludes. Hands shot up around the room, neighbors who had stayed silent for too long now raising their voices. As security escorted Ms. Reynolds and her closest allies out of the building, the crowd applauded. Not out of cruelty, but out of relief. The curtain had been pulled back, the lies unraveled. And for the first time in a long time, the community felt united not by fear of fines or HOA threats, but by truth. Outside, the last of the storm clouds drifted away, and the air felt cleaner, lighter. The flood hadn't just soaked their office, it had washed away the rot hiding beneath years of forced smiles and silent meetings. And this was only the beginning. 3 weeks after the storm, the air in Pinarest Village felt different, lighter somehow. Gone were the anxious glances behind curtains or the whispered complaints exchanged over backyard fences. In their place came the sound of hammers rebuilding, shovels turning soil, and neighbors talking, really talking, for the first time in years. The HOA office, once a symbol of secrecy and control, had been gutted, cleaned, and reopened under a new name: the Pinarest Community Resource Center. Its walls, once lined with framed certificates and warning notices, now held corkboards covered with gardening tips, workshop schedules, and transparent monthly budget reports. Where the board members only sign used to hang, a fresh banner read, "Everyone welcome." Eleanor's walker clacked softly as she entered the building, balancing a tray of potted basil and rosemary. "The garden committee sent these," she said with a grin, placing them beside the newly refurbished kitchen. "Smells like progress already." Outside, children giggled as they filled watering cans from a shared rain barrel system now legally installed across the neighborhood, each one marked with a bright green sticker that read, "Community Approved." What started as a personal battle over stolen water had grown into something far greater than any of us had imagined. Marcus approached, laptop under one arm and a clipboard in the other. "Water usage reports are in," he said with a proud smile. "We're down 30% since the new collection system went live, and the city is offering us a sustainability grant if we keep this up for 6 months. I nodded, soaking it all in. The rows of garden beds behind the center now tended by volunteers from every block. The shared tool shed funded by community donations, the laughter of kids harvesting their first cucumbers. The very soil seemed to hum with new energy. The interim committee had done more than fill the power vacuum left by the old HOA board. They'd rewritten the rules, literally. Out went the punitive fines for minor infractions. In came cooperative solutions and monthly forums where every homeowner had a voice. Monthly dues were adjusted with full transparency, and for the first time residents felt they were actually getting something back. Shade trees planted, sidewalks repaired, and programs created to support seniors and low-income families. At our first official vote on the new bylaws, nearly every resident attended. We filled the community hall with folding chairs, casseroles, and cautious hope. The resolution passed unanimously. The room erupted in applause, not because we'd won against someone, but because we'd finally won with one another. Even Ms. Reynolds, stripped of her authority and pride, showed up quietly one evening, a tray of seedlings in hand. She shuffled awkwardly toward the back garden, unsure of her place. I met her halfway. "I came to help," she muttered, eyes downcast. "They assigned me to assist with the rain barrel setup, community service." I nodded and handed her a pair of gloves. "Plot 14 is ready for planting. Tomatoes work well there." She blinked in surprise, then took the gloves. "Thank you," she said quietly. In the end, it wasn't about revenge or humiliation. It was about accountability, yes, but more than that, it was about reclaiming something we'd all lost over time: trust. That Saturday, we held the first annual Pinarest Harvest Festival. Long tables stretched across the common lawn, covered in food grown in the shared gardens and baked goods from homes that hadn't spoken in years. Children painted signs for their favorite vegetables, while teens offered garden tours to curious grandparents. Even Diane, the once elusive neighbor from down the cul-de-sac, brought her famous lemon bars and joined a game of cornhole. Near sunset, I stood by my original rain barrels. the same ones that had started it all, and watched as the community, our community, laughed and lingered into the evening. People weren't just neighbors now. They were partners, friends, co-creators of something better. Eleanor stepped beside me, her face warm with pride. "You know," she said, patting my arm, "this all began because you refused to let them steal what was yours. And look where we are now." I looked around at the shared gardens, the re-energized faces, the simple joy of belonging. "I didn't expect any of this," I replied. She smiled, eyes twinkling. "The best things in life are the ones you don't expect, but fight for anyway." And as the lights flickered on across the lawn, powered by our shared solar panels and rain-fed irrigation, I realized something even deeper. This wasn't just a victory over corruption. It was a return to the kind of community my grandparents had dreamed of when they first settled here. One where people listened, helped, and grew together. In life, the most powerful changes often begin with something small. A single act of resistance, a barrel of rainwater, a moment of saying, "This isn't right." What began as a quiet attempt to conserve water and live more sustainably soon unfolded into something much larger, a confrontation with injustice, a reawakening of community spirit, and a lesson in how resilience can ripple outward far beyond our front yards. For older adults who've weathered many storms in life, both literal and figurative, this story may feel especially familiar. The feeling of being dismissed, of having your values challenged by bureaucracy or shifting societal priorities, can be disheartening. Yet here, we see a reminder that one voice, firmly and respectfully raised, can still make a difference. Standing up for what you believe in, your land, your rights, your dignity, is not just for the young. It's a lifelong responsibility and a privilege that experience makes even more meaningful. One of the strongest messages in this story is the power of community. It would have been easy to go it alone, to fight quietly, or walk away altogether. But it was through listening, reaching out, and connecting with neighbors, some old, some new, that the main character found strength. Each person brought something to the table: wisdom, skills, support, ideas. And together, they achieved what none could have done individually. This is an enduring truth. When we come together with honesty and shared purpose, even the most broken systems can be repaired. Another deeply important lesson is about legacy. The rain barrels, the generator, the hand-drawn maps, these weren't just objects. They were symbols of foresight, preparation, and care passed down from a previous generation. Many older adults know the importance of leaving something behind, not just in material terms, but in values. This story honors that. It shows how what we plant, both literally and figuratively, can continue to bear fruit long after we're gone. Our actions, however modest, become the roots of change for those who follow. And perhaps most powerfully, the story shows how people can change. Even the most stubborn, misguided individuals, like Ms. Reynolds, are capable of growth. When confronted with truth, when given the chance to participate in something better, even an adversary can become an ally. That, too, is a lesson in compassion and patience. It's never too late for reconciliation, and it's never too late to be part of something hopeful. In the end, this story is not just about water, property, or regulations. It's about perseverance, about the quiet strength that comes from doing the right thing, even when it's inconvenient, and about the belief that no matter your age, your voice still matters, that you still have the power to protect what's yours, inspire change, and help your community grow one drop at a time.